Sure.
Everyone. All right. Welcome everyone to this webinar, Leveraging Your Strengths During Job Seeking and Career Development with Ross Rotherham. Ross is a performance and leadership coach who has been a valuable part of PSC community for many years, whether he's contributing to our enablement programs or guiding members on how to use their strengths. His insights have always been so impactful and so valuable for everyone he interacts with. We are just thrilled to have you with us today, Ross. Please give him a warm welcome as we already have. Today, the more you engage in the chat, the more exciting it's going to be for everyone. Put your questions in there, comment on things Ross is sharing, and we're going to have just a really, really wonderful time together. So Ross, I will pass it off to you.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. And Stephen, I don't know if you start out any of your presentations with people from the US this way, but I like to say I'm joining from Sydney. So I'm coming from, it's tomorrow here. I'm joining you from the future. And I can let you know that tomorrow is absolutely going to be fine based on what I'm seeing so far. So I guess just a little bit more context on how did I come to be here. I am now fully involved in my own business in leadership development, facilitation and coaching. But prior to that, I did 20 years in pre-sales. So I started working in startups in New York. I lived in New York for a long time. And then based out of Australia, I ran the pre-sales organisation as senior director for Akamai, where I had a team of 50 people across Asia Pacific and Japan. While I was there, we rolled out the Clifton Strengths program to a global group of 300 people, and I just fell in love with the concept of strengths there. Since I've been out of my own business, I've had the opportunity to work with about 500 people, leaders and individual contributors with their strengths. So it's something I'm really passionate about. So I am going to use Clifton Strengths language in the session today, but that's the way I engage with strengths. I've tried to put it together in a way where you can translate the concepts that I talk about into any type of strength. So we will use Clifton Strengths language, but don't worry if you haven't got your Clifton Strengths, and I'll make it as translatable as possible. And also, if there's questions you have as we're going along, then feel free to throw them in. So these are the concepts that I use with leaders that I'm working with or other people on their career planning, on understanding themselves, how do they position themselves, and how do they talk to their team members about their team members' development as well. So what sort of language do they use to connect and motivate with individuals in their teams? Right at the end of the session, in addition to the content I cover, I've got a document from the University of Missouri Career Center from back in 2011 that talks about using your strengths in job search, using your strengths in interviews, and using your strengths once you get into a new position. And I'm happy to share that with anybody. So I'll talk about how to make that available. That hopefully will be a good add-on for anyone who's in that part of their career section. So we've got an hour or so. Really, we'll get to scratch the surface. We'll go as far as we can in that time. And before I start, in any session, I would always start with this question, possibly some others, but I want you to consciously make a decision for the next hour. How engaged are you going to be? And with that in mind, think about giving yourself a score from 1 to 7. So 7 is there is nothing else going on in your world except for me. I'm the only thing you can hear. You're really here and you're taking everything on. And a 1 is you've logged in, but you've already checked out and you're not even hearing this message. And I'm not going to ask you to tell me that, but be conscious about how you're going to be in this session. Think about a number. And then when you've chosen your number, if it's a 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, whatever it is, think about what's one thing I can do right now in my immediate area that will help me achieve that level of engagement. And if that's put your phone on the other side of the room, close a few windows, turn your email off, whatever it is, just make one change that will help you be really engaged. Okay, so let's kick off. So with the strengths, what we're going to cover today, looking at some things around like strengths as self-awareness and really looking for how you can create clarity of the way that you can connect into a role, and how when you're coming from a strengths position that you'll be able to express things about yourself with really deep belief and passion as well. And to do that, we're going to talk about some foundational strengths concepts. So what does the term strengths actually mean from my perspective anyway? We're going to look at some positive and negative manifestations. And to look at those positive and negative manifestations, we're going to deep dive into one specific strength. And I've chosen being analytical as something that I see quite a lot in the pre-sale space. And we're going to look about also weakness versus blind spot. What's the difference between those two things? And again, from my perspective, right? And I'm really open to hear alternative positions on that. And then how you can go about working with others. And then looking at how you can use that information to position yourself in careers discussions, and whether that's with new jobs that you're positioning for, or for career discussions within your role. So a strength, in the context here, I'm going to talk about a strength as using something that we do naturally that creates an ability for us to deliver consistently excellent outcomes. But it doesn't just come, the strength doesn't just come naturally to us. Talents come naturally to us. So the talent is the natural way of thinking, feeling, and behaving, or thinking, feeling, or behaving. For that to be a strength, we need to invest in it. We need to put time in to those natural talents to make them strengths. And to explain that a little bit more, we have the concept that strengths can either be raw or mature. So a talent on its own will be the raw end potentially. And when you've invested and spent time with that, then it becomes a strength. So a couple of examples will be communication as a strength. When it's raw, that could manifest as somebody who just has a joy of using words and telling stories, but that can come out as dominating conversations without realizing that you're doing it. When you've invested in that and you've spent time and you've matured that communication strength, then it could become, for example, storytelling that's connected to really impactful outcomes. Learning at the raw end, where it's a talent, but it's not been leaned into. It could be learning for the sake of learning because it's a joyous thing to you, and jumping from topic to topic to topic to topic, but not with anything beyond just that joy of taking on knowledge. And when it's more mature, then it's learning with a focus on impactful outcomes. So really focusing your learning on what you need it to be about to move forward. And with pre-sales, that could be around a range of different knowledge or skills associated with whatever the tools and products are that you're working with. It can also be around research of individuals and organizations that you're working with as well, or looking to work with. Responsibility, when it's raw, can be responsibility as a talent. So a really liking to take on tasks where the outcome will help another person out. When that's raw, that can be saying yes to everything, taking on too much, putting yourself in a position where you could burn out. So if you're that person who every meeting, whenever a task gets tabled, your hand instantly goes up, yeah, I'll take it. That could be part of that. And there's other reasons, right, that could manifest that. But mature will be the ability to say no to things that are not in line with what you need to be doing now, and saying, which gives you the opportunity to say yes to activities that have an impactful outcome. So the raw and mature concept, part of the foundation. And so the strengths are like a muscle, right? The more that you train them, the stronger you get. So a question I would ask you, and this is just rhetorical at this point, I guess, is what do you do to keep your strengths developing once you've identified what they are? So with the strengths or the talents, everyone has a range of talents, and you would have seen that list at the beginning of mine, and that has a group of 10 core strengths in it. And I'm going to bring that up and talk about it a little bit more a bit later. But So everyone has these talents that are naturally recurring ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And there's some examples there, right? So instinctively starting conversations and so on. But there's an aspect that, and this is a really fundamental concept that I want to get across here. So if there's one thing you walk away with today, this is it. And that is that talents include a need that we're motivated to satisfy. So if you have a natural talent for instinctively starting conversations, then you need to find opportunities to start conversations. If you have a natural talent for seeing patterns in data, so analytical, then you need opportunities to do analysis of data, right? If you have a natural talent for feeling emotions, you need opportunity to experience emotions. And when I say need, these are the things that in the absence or with them, you'll feel satisfied in your role. In the absence of having those things fulfilled, your role will not feel satisfying to you, or potentially not feel satisfying to you. And we can job shape within roles, right? So pre-sales, there's a lot of different ways to come at that role. So being able to fit these things in, but knowing what they are and knowing why they energize you and how you can bring them forward in your role is really important. And when you've got that need satisfaction and you're doing what you love, that's when you can really get great results, higher likelihood of recognition for great work, reducing the chance of burnout, increasing your well-being, a whole range of different things, right? That's when things go really well. So with strengths, and there's the concept that we're all unique, right? And if I look from a Clifton Strengths concept is that when you do that assessment, there's 34 strengths that are stack ranked, and the top 10 are your core strengths. It's a little bit, that's a bit oversimplification, but for now it's good. But the likelihood of someone having the same top 5 strengths as you in the same order is 33 million to 1, right? So it's very unlikely. And so given that we're just approaching 33 million people who've taken the strengths assessment now, and there's not many that cross over, but this is an important concept, and it's different from, I've been through a whole lot of different psychometric assessments, and DISC was an early one, and I loved DISC at the time, but I had this funny experience of, we broke up into 4 groups, and 50% of us went off to the D group and talked about how we were the same of being dominant. And it was a really varied group of people talking about that one thing we had in common. But so I really love the concept of it's about our unique position. So considering how you're unique, being able to really lean into your natural talents, communicate your unique value proposition, because you bring something that's different to every other person who's in the room, who's interviewing you. You bring something different to every other person in the team. And knowing what that is can really help with your satisfaction, your outcomes, and the teams as well, right? And the organization. And it's important with that uniqueness being clear in how you work effectively with others. And we'll dive into that a little bit more a bit later. So the strengths are not about what you do. It's not that we have a profile of strengths in Clifton or in any other strengths theory that says this type of strengths matches this type of role. So it's not about what you do, it's about how you do it. And so with the how you do it, different people come to the same outcome in different ways. And so if we use the concept of persuasion, so with persuasion, we all have to persuade, right? But we do it in different ways. So someone who's got really high analytical strength might persuade people by bringing the strong data story, right? They bring facts and validation and clear descriptions of causes. Someone with high empathy as a strength might bring an ability to persuade by connecting emotionally with the people in the room, knowing what it is that makes them tick, and using that to get and not using in a negative way, using that to build relationships, build trust, and create persuasion through that way. Someone with high communication as a strength could be using like really good stories, clever use of words, things like that to describe why something matters and persuading others based on that. And someone who's a learner can persuade by being the person in the room who knows the absolute most about whatever the thing is. So the SME, right, who's got it all nailed down. So with that, there's all different ways to go about it as well, right? Other things. So persuasion we use as an example, but completing projects could be another one. Some people complete projects by having high responsibility and taking ownership and just getting in and getting that done. Some people are great at completing projects through delegation. Some are great through collaboration. So one of my strengths as a leader was being able to bring the right people together into a team, corral them around a shared goal, and get them to move forward in that way. So it's not about what we do, it's about how we do it. Now, so we're going to look at how do the strengths play out at work. So the types of activities that we're doing day in and day out. So things that energize us or depress us, the things that when you open your calendar in the morning and you look at them and you go, oh, not that again. Like that is something that's probably not going to be mapping to your strengths, right? So finding ways to bring more in that are based on what you naturally do well and doing things more from that place. So we'll look at some activities. We'll look at how we invest in our strengths. So personal investment. So if we're overusing our strengths, how could that manifest in a negative way? If we're underutilizing our strengths, what could happen about that? Like one might be a lack of satisfaction in the role that we're doing. And what happens when we're doing the right amount and we're then excelling and being really satisfied by what we do. I'll look also at how we're managed by others. So considering if your leaders are considering what your strengths are when they're managing you, then that's going to manifest as you feeling really honored in the type of work that you're doing. And on the other side, if you're constantly being given tasks that don't map with your natural talents, then it has the possibility of feeling a bit insulted in that sense. So we'll look at also how motivations vary. And the way I want to look at this is by deep diving into at least one, and we might do a little bit of a second strength as well. And this concept can be taken on any of the any type of strength you can think about this way. I'm just saying in the chat about how consistent are the strengths. So I'll make a comment on that now. If I look at Clifton Strengths, which it was called Strengths Finders years ago, because that's owned by Gallup, which is a big data crunching organization, there's been a lot of research done on that. And what they've found is that the strengths are quite stable over time. And there are some statistical documents or research documents with the statistics that describe that. But at a novice level, it would say that if you were to retake your strengths at a later date, the likelihood of the top 10 has a likelihood of staying 75% the same. So I've also got anecdotal stories. So my personal one, I took the strengths originally when I was in a super high stress role, lots of travel away from home, 2 weeks every month, running teams, doing all of that. And I took the strengths assessment about 3 years later when I was in a coaching role and had a very different stress profile and other things. And the results for me was my top 10 were exactly the same in a slightly different order. And my bottom 5 were exactly the same in a slightly different order. So for me personally, I think they're very stable. I've seen other cases where people, one person who did the profiling on their first day of a job at one of the big 4 consulting firms. And because it was their first day, they answered some of the questions in a way that they thought the office would, or the organisation would want them to answer. They took it again 5 years later, and their empathy strength had moved up 15 points. But there was a very conscious, or 15 levels, I should say. There was a very conscious acknowledgement from that person that they were not being fully authentic in the first time that they took it. Anyway, hopefully that helps, Ben. Yeah, so deep diving into one strength. And so I've chose analytic. We could have gone with anything. So in this one, if there's activities that you're doing in your role every day, right? Repetitive activities. So the types of activities that someone with a high analytic strength is going to find not particularly pleasing for them is working with things where there's no opportunity to prove, to get to a proof, right? So working within intuition, follow your gut, that type of activities is going to be a place where the person who's really high with analytical strength is going to struggle. On the other side, where they're going to be really happy and satisfied is opportunities where activity is giving them the opportunity to look for simplicity and clarity in data. So opportunity to do analysis or opportunity to bring a level-headed view and cut through some of the emotional reactions that are going on to a state. Not that any of you, I'm sure, have ever had situations where there's been emotional reactions in a work setting. I jest, so the different types of activities that you're doing day to day are either going to be, yeah, this is awesome, I'm loving this, I want to do more of it, and you're going to be getting in and doing, just really nailing it, or they're things that are going to be a struggle, you're going to be leaving work feeling drained and problematic, right? The next group in the middle here, the personal investment. So when we're investing in the strength, and this ties back to the concept of raw and mature. So when the analytical strength is not invested in and it's operating at a raw level, we might find that those people are getting stuck in analysis paralysis, right? They haven't developed to a level where they know how to stop looking for the truth. And I've personally been one of those people. My boss hated it. And together we worked to move through that, but that was more than a decade ago now. Also, the high analytic, when you need to know the truth, if you can't get to the truth, then it can manifest as being perceived by others as being overly skeptical or maybe being dismissive of emotions, right? But on the other side, where you've got that mature strength going on around analytical and you're doing activities that you love doing, then you have the opportunity to be the truth seeker, right? To really lean into your objective, clear thinking and using that for problem solving and decision making. And then when you're being managed by somebody, then whether they're taking into consideration that analytical is a strength for you and those types of activities are meaningful for you, then if you're dealing with a manager who's very trust the gut and follow the intuition and it'll be all good and don't worry about the data, I have a good feeling about this one, that can be problematic for people who are quite analytical. But where you've got someone who delegates to you opportunity to really sink your teeth into the data. So I was given the task of coming up with POC conversion rates and being able to look at what was the different conversion rates associated with different sales stages, with the types of activities that were happening, how much time of different roles was being burned in all of those, and got given the keys to all the data to be able to pull that together, which was just awesome, right? That was really going into it. And I probably did go a bit towards the analysis paralysis, that we went deep and hard into that, but pulled back to having a really nice place of usable, functional data around those concepts. But so my manager recognized that in me, gave that task explicitly to me, and that was really honoring that strength for me as well. So we can do this across a whole bunch of different strengths. given we are going on good on time, so I'll have a look at this one a little bit. And a different strength called relator, and in Clifton, relator is about people who have a preference for a deep mutual relationships. So rather than, and a preference for a small group of close relationships. So it could be both at work and at home, but a small knit group where it takes some time to build trust. And when they're in a trusting relationship with someone, the amount that they share with that person is the amount that they expect to get back from that person in level of depth of relationship. So people with high relator, and if people with high relator, like activities, if they're given lots of activities where they're needing to constantly meet new people and engage in small talk and do things that are outside that realm of that close-knit relationship and deep trust that they like, then that can be really problematic, and a difficult place for those people to be. So, you know, the person with the high relator who is the front person at the networking event 5 days a week is not going to be a terribly happy person. And there'll be other people who really love being in that role, right? But so the A's and around, in this case, we've got close friends with friends and family, but really in a work context where this can really shine is people with high relator love to have like a best friend at work or a tight-knit group that they get to really go deep and work hard with. So if you know that about yourself, being able to build those relationships, and if you know that about people in your teams, then you can know to put them in situations where they get to be on a team for a longer period of time and build that deep relationship rather than moving them. Like it might, in pre-sales, it might be a situation, a difference between having an alignment between pre-sales and sales that's ongoing versus a pooled model where they're needing to switch out with different salespeople all the time. That could be something to consider with this type of strength. And had a thought gone. That'll come back. With the personal involvement, right? Relators where it's in that raw end can be perceived by others as being cliquish or difficult to get to know. So it's interesting when I get to work with teams, and there'll be not always, but if there's a team where there's a really strong relator sense, where most of them have that really high up, then one of the questions I'll ask that team is, how do you welcome new people into your team when building trust over a longer period of time is something that you like to do? So we can start looking at it of how the dynamics work within teams as well. But these people, once you are connected with them and they're connected and matured that strength, they're really genuine, authentic people, right? One of the places I fell down as a leader, relator's not particularly high for me. I love the meeting new people, the being out and networking, all of that. I would come through the office back when we used to go to the office. So I'd come through the office on a Monday morning and walk past some people from the team or other people. Oh, how was your weekend? And by the time they started to answer, I was already in my office, and it was more of a pleasantry from me. When a relator asks you how was your weekend, or someone who has a strength of that deep mutual trusting thing, they really want to know the answer. They genuinely want to know the answer, right? And so being conscious of what that is. I remembered what the other thing that I lost. People like this will react much better to having a one-on-one or need to have a one-on-one meeting as a regular event in addition to the team meetings that are going on. So relators really like to have that one-on-one thing. And then managing them. So, well, one of the insulting things, what I just said about walking through the room and saying, how's your weekend, and not waiting for the answer, that wouldn't go over well with these people. But where you really honour them is that around that one-on-one time and being able to take the time to build that relationship. And probably it will get to a much more beyond work level as well, right? Knowing each other's kids' names and ages and challenges and the pets and all of that sort of thing in addition to the work. So that we can dive into any strength with that and think about what are the activities I'm doing? What are the ones I like and don't like? How can I find more of the things that I like in what I do every day? What are the activities that currently result in me feeling stressed or pressured? Is that something where I can invest a little bit more time in thinking of a different way to do it and mature in a way that I can get away from that type of thing? And how can I communicate to my leader the types of things so it's super clear what I don't like doing and what I do like doing? And get more of that. And in work, there's always things we have to do that and not within our realm of joy, right? But if you can move more towards the things that you naturally do well and you enjoy doing, then your work life's going to be much more satisfying. So another concept, and then we'll start looking at how to think about these. Well, actually, a couple more foundational things, but the concept of motivation. So when you have a need associated with a strength or talent, then that also means we're motivated to achieve that. So we're motivated in different ways and we gravitate towards what motivates us. And we have a number of different strengths. So we're going to be motivated in different ways, right? Multiple different ways. So we might have a task. It could be the same task. It could be, well, there's any number of different tasks that you can think of. But someone will think, I'm enthusiastic to get into that task because there could be a whole range of different reasons for the exact same task. One person wants to get into it because they can fix it. And one person wants to get into it because they can make it from good to great. They can make it awesome. So they're motivated different ways. Someone else can get into it because they can see how it can make for a better future. Or another person will think, oh yeah, I want to get into it and make it the same way that we did it in the past, right? And these go on. There's a whole lot of different motivations. And with this, I work with Clifton and it has about 34, or it has exactly 34, I should say, strengths. I have done some work with another coach who says he has 300 different words for describing individual strengths, right? So, and each of these has a little bit of a nuance. And if you understand this about yourself, you can put yourself in positions where you can do more of what you love. If you understand this about the people around you, you can have the right people coming in and working on the right things within their career. And if you're a leader and you understand this about your team, then it absolutely is a game changer for delegation. When I got all of the strengths profiles of the people in my team, it just was a light bulb moment for me of where I'd often thought, I'm not going to give that task to anyone else because I don't personally like doing that task. It's terrible. And then I realized, oh, I can give that task that I don't like doing to this person because actually they would love it. And then I just completely changed the way that I delegated. I changed the way that I started talking to people about career development discussions. A whole lot of things shifted. So another aspect of strengths is the concept of weakness, right? And so we'll talk about weakness and we'll talk about blind spots as well. So with the concept of weakness, so this is a picture of me trying to connect with my emotional empathy, which is quite low. Cognitive empathy, absolutely at the top. Emotional empathy, right at the bottom. But so weakness, we will talk about weakness in the strengths world as anything that gets in the way of achieving an outcome. So it could be a number of different things. And this includes blind spots, which I'm going to dive into more in a moment. But it also includes skills and knowledge gaps. It includes behavioral patterns that we don't naturally display where we need to get support from other people. So with weakness, yes, you need to work on weaknesses as well as strengths. However, my personal view is if your weakness is a skill and knowledge gap, no question, you must work on that through developing it, right? However, if your weakness is to do with a behavioral pattern that doesn't come naturally to you, then it may actually be an enormous amount of time spent to not get a very great outcome and be difficult and unpleasant to take yourself through it. So when we look at in the strengths world that I'm in, we look at the ones at the bottom of the list, not as weakness, but as non-strengths. And with those, the suggestion, rather than trying to develop those, it's look at how can you achieve the same outcome as that, but cobbling together some of your core strengths to get that same outcome. We look at if that's something that you can't or don't like to do, how can you partner with people who do bring that and then work together in units to be able to bring that together? And the other thing I'd say is some of the things that might be described as weaknesses are just things that aren't that important to you, and you need to not worry about them. So you got as far as you did today by being you, naturally who you are. So you will go far by putting the development into your strengths and the things you naturally do well, rather than trying to become someone who you aren't. Which brings me to blind spots. So blind spots. So when we lean into a talent or a strength too much, and the perception of others of what we're doing is quite different to the perception we have ourselves. And so with the blind spots, I would say out of everything that I do with people when I'm working with strengths, this is the area that has the biggest impact, and is also the area that I personally had the biggest impact as well. So when you're leaning into something you love without considering the perspective of others, right? So high communication, you're getting in and you're talking, and you're telling stories, and it's awesome and you're loving it and it's great. But from the perception of others, it's, oh man, he's just dominating this. No one else is getting a word in. There could be, it's that different view. So being able to understand what that blind spot is, and it can be quite difficult to see our own blind spot. So I would encourage you to ask other people. So what is it that other people say is a behavior you have that can be annoying? And you probably want to ask someone who you have a reasonably good relationship with to get an honest answer to that, or a useful answer to that. But they can manifest in different ways, right? And they might not be as extreme as what I just described. Another way to get it, go and do the assessment, I think, and then go back to your strength finder, and in that report, it's going to have listed potential blind spots under every one of your top 10 strengths, right? And so with that, you can start considering, oh, do I do that? Right? Is that a thing? And even ask other people. But some examples of that could be, and these might not come up like raised to the level of extreme behavior, but these are the types of things we talk about with blind spots. Someone who is a naturally strategic thinker in the framework that I'm describing here. So someone who, when you say to them, how do you get from A to B, or how are we going to get from A to B? Then, and what happens is in that person's mind, they create a map, right? They look at 6 different ways to get from A to B. In the time it takes them to think of all those 6 ways, they evaluate all of them. They decide which one's the best, and then that's the one they say. So what that looks like from the outside is, hey, Ross, how are we going to get from A to B? And I go, do this, right? So the blind spot in that is it can come across as dictatorial. People don't know all of that thought that went on in your mind. So often the correction of a blind spot with strategic thinkers is as simple as be more transparent about what happened in your mind so that people understand. Because when they get the do this, it's like, oh, okay. Where if you were to say, oh, I just thought of a few different ways we could do it, and I've evaluated them, and the one I think is the best is this because of this reason. So can we do that? Right? That's a very different experience for the person on the other side. Another one, this is kind of a fun one. Is it work related? Yeah, I guess it's work related. someone who's a real high achiever, which manifests as a need to finish tasks. They always have a task list, and there's a joy of putting the line through those tasks as they're finished. And a blind spot for them can be a perception that they put work before people. And I'm sure no one here has ever done this, but it's that moment of you're working at home, you're on your computer, you're doing your task, and your partner calls out, "Hey, dinner's on the table. Can you come down in a minute?" And you say, "No problem. I just need to finish this one thing." And then an hour later, when you finish the one thing and you go down for dinner, and dinner's either still on the table and cold or possibly in the bin if it happens frequently, and no one's there anymore. But so it's the leaning into the joy of I've got to complete this task because that's what I'm driven by. But the perception of others is that work is then taking precedence over people. And a way to get around that as a blind spot is to learn to break tasks into multiple smaller pieces so that you have break points that you can walk away and come back and do the next one. Another one, an activator. So jumping in without considering risk, right? So someone who just is, let's go, 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 don't slow me down. And those people, and this is actually a personal story of how I ended up in coaching. When you've got that need to move fast, when someone puts a blocker in front of you and you can't move fast, that movement energy can translate or can quickly turn into anger or some other kind of frustration and energy. And so for me personally, and don't share this with anyone, I can only see me on the screen, so I'm assuming I'm only telling me, but I got into coaching after winning an award called the Angriest Little Man Award a couple of years running. And it was a joke, but it also had a lot of validity about it. And that was related to that sense of I have a real let's get going energy about me, a high activator, and people would get in my way of let's slow this down. And I just smashed through those walls, right? And that got me a coach. And I'm in a much better place now. So also thinking about how our strengths impact how we work with other people. So with this, the concept of, I've put a couple of kind of opposing pairs up here. And again, it's in Clifton language, but the concepts are the same. Communicate, someone who likes to talk a lot and they're a verbal processor. They understand their thoughts more clearly when they say words out loud. Someone with high intellection tends to be someone who likes to think things through fully, deeply, and privately. And when they fully understand them, that's when they'll start talking about it. And this could be the person, like in a meeting, the communicator is the really loud person. The intellection person is the person who's really quiet in the meeting. And the deep thinker is saying, oh, that person's full of hot air. And the vocal person saying, oh, that person's really quiet and introverted or just not paying attention. And it's a misinterpretation of what's going on. And if they can understand that about each other, they can use those talents to pair up and go forward together. Activator and deliberative. Activator, that let's get going energy. And when it's with someone with deliberative's about let's evaluate all the risk ahead of time and make sure that this thing's going to go well. And once we understand all of that, then we take the first step, right? And that can be a real butting of heads. So I remember back in one of the organisations I worked in, we would call this, we being pre-sales and sales, would call the services organisation the deal prevention unit, because we had the sense of they were always wanting to slow things down while we were always wanting to get moving. So one says, you're too fast, and the other one says, you're too slow, right? So how do those people learn and understand and work together so that they can have a good work experience and career development around that, right? Adaptability and focus. So someone who's really happy to take on change and someone who finds change a little bit more difficult. Or command and harmony. Somebody who finds tension and conflict in decision-making is a really positive and useful trait, and someone who finds avoiding conflict or tension at all costs, right? How do you find ways for those to work together well? So, so with all of this, we can now start thinking of positioning ourselves with strengths, right? And again, I'm using some Clifton language, but I think this translates really easily beyond that. If we think about our concept of with the strengths of we can bucket them. So there's strengths related to executing, how you get your work done, and your specific way of enjoying work, right? There's strengths related to relating. How do you go about building relationships? There's strengths relating to thinking. How do you generate ideas, problem solve, and make decisions? And there's strengths related to influencing. So how do you bring people on a journey? And I would encourage you to have a story around each of these. And depending on where you are, if it's going in for interviews, of being able to, and I'm going to talk about building these stories in a moment, and or developing your careers, right? If you're further along, of having understandings of each of these different areas. So executing, it's like thinking about your natural way of interacting with demos, POCs, RFPs, meeting preps, your level of risk, comfort, all of those sorts of things. The relating, how do you relate with teams, your team, sales, product, customer success, services, customers, all of those things. And in that one, you can think, what were the great relationships that I had that really worked well, right? And in fact, one of my best sales, pre-sales interactions before leading when I was an IC was a salesman who we would have stand-up screaming matches in the middle of the office, and then we'd go and have a beer. And that was part of our process, right? And possibly it wasn't the best for some of the people around us, but that conflict really helped us move quickly through things. And we did some massive business together out here, which was awesome. When we're like thinking about thinking, so do we think about the future? Do we think about the past? Do we like analysis? Are we research? How do we research customers? All of that, and influencing, bringing people on the journey. Are we a storyteller? Are we an activator, energizing people, bringing them along? So thinking about all of those, and then what's your strongest, and then thinking about examples and stories that back it up. So I'm not going to spend time on this, but if we go into too much time, with Clifton, it breaks each of these into nuanced ways. So there's different nuances to how we strategically think. There's different nuances to how we execute, and each of these will have a different aspect of how the need is fulfilled and how forgot what that, how blind spots manifest. So, in strategic, are you a map maker? Are you a greenfields ideas guy? Are you a future visionary? Right? In executing, are you driven by a need to complete or driven by a feeling of responsibility? Building relationships, is it that close, trusting relationship that I talked about before, or about bringing groups together? Or is it about that your thing is putting energy into other people to develop them, right? Or influence? What's your comfort level with starting new connections, or are you driven by leaving a legacy and recognition and those sorts of things? But if you understand that, your ability to tell your story becomes much more nuanced and much more powerful, and you'll reflect it in a really energized way. So when we're thinking about positioning ourselves, we think about, so I have a talent for. An example where I used this was, and the result of that. So that might be, I have a talent for analysis and I'm motivated to use data for decision making. An example of this was implementing an activity tracking system for the pre-sales team across APAC and Japan. And one thing that showed us was that my India team was using 70% of their time on post-sales work. And that gave me the data I needed to have it to be able to influence sales and the services team to change that. And we were able to move the team back to the lion's share of their time on closing new business, right? So that's the type of story that I would tell in when I'm talking about my strengths. And I've got one of those stories for every one of my strengths here, right? And combinations of those as well. But I'm making that connection between what do I love, what do I naturally do well, and what's the outcome when I get to lean into that. Similar thing of if we go into blind spots. So as I've matured as a leader, a blind spot, behaviour and result. So a personal blind spot I became aware of was being a poor listener, which came as a surprise. I used to score myself 4 out of 4 for listening in the surveys. And now that I've actually learnt to listen properly, I generally give myself a 2 and on a good day a 3. But I learnt to listen and saw that as a real blind spot for me. And it changed from jumping in to put my solution in as quickly as I could to genuinely listening to the other person all the way to the end of what they had to say. And I believe now I'm a good listener. It's impacted everything positively, how I build relationships, build trust, get clarity in customer situations, deal with challenging situations or relationships, and how I relate to my teenager, which absolutely is something that changed for me through going through this world of coaching and strengths. So with that in mind, what we've gone through today is the concept of genuinely identifying and knowing your strengths so you can connect with them and you can speak about yourself with passion and energy, right? That shows. People see it, they feel it, they know it. Being able to build stories like those couple of quick examples that I gave you earlier, just a moment ago, knowing your blind spots and understanding what they are, knowing how to address them. And even if it's something that's been a big change for you in your career, using that as one of your stories, because that's somebody who then shows up as being coachable, as being self-reflective, self-aware, all of those sorts of things. So, and how you understand your strengths will help you with understanding how you interact with other people, particularly the people who currently piss you off, and possibly you do the same to them. But with that, being able to understand where they're coming from, what's their perspective, how are they driven, and that's going to help you with being able to work with people through your career in a much more effective way. And the most important thing about all of this is the more you understand yourself, what drives you, what you're satisfied by, will ensure that you put yourself forward for roles or you job shape where possible to be able to provide an opportunity for you to be in a role that really fulfills your needs. So that's what I wanted to cover today. Clifton's bottom 5, illuminate blind spots. Blind spots tend to be related to your natural talents. So the non-strengths tend to be, the ones at the bottom, tend to be more about things that you just don't do naturally. And so they don't tend to come up as blind spots as much. My blind spots were around communicating, activator, those types of things. I've got a thing on here. Just let me find this document, if I can. So the document, for anyone who's in an early, like in a career seeking mode, then this document here, and again, it is Clifton language, but I still think it's possibly worth reading, even if you don't have that. But it goes through all of the strengths in the job search, in the interview, in the new position, and talks about little tips. A document like this for me, if you were to take that and pull out 2 or 3 gems, that's a win, right? And so if you're interested in that document, I'm happy to share it. Just message me on LinkedIn, or I'll drop my so that's my email. So if you send me a message on LinkedIn or through the email, then I'm happy to send that over to you. Are the slides going to be shared? I'm happy to share them. I'll arrange that with Courtney. So I guess, so Courtney, I said I had 45 minutes. Lucky it was an hour.
Right on time. It was perfect.